Mark Consuelos and Kelly Ripa have always been the picture of perfection when it comes to love, family, and resilience. Nevertheless, a terrible truth has only lately come to light. Mark has been fighting cancer, which has shocked his family, even though he has innumerable admirers who love him for his performances, marriage, and parenting. American morning TV host Kelly Ripa broke down in tears during a show as she felt the weight of the world crushing down on her. What chain of events led to this shocking revelation? Kelly mustered the strength to keep going. How did she do it? And what does this mean for the couple's future, who are among the most beloved in the country? Stay captivated because this story has hope, sadness, and the kind of love that can weather any storm. It was Mark and Kelly's home, not the media, where rumors first began to swirl. There were subtle changes in Mark's health, along with a persistent weariness and a cough that wouldn't go away. These were just little clues, but Kelly couldn't ignore them. At first, Mark ignored it. He was always full of life and energy. His family could always count on him to be steady. But Kelly felt like something was missing. In most cases, a spouse's gut feeling is spot on. Behind the scenes, a quiet storm was gathering, and it would eventually erupt with excruciating certainty. Even as the world watched the same charismatic Mark Consuelos on television, their lives were irrevocably altered after a trip to the doctor. Their whole world seemed to have turned upside down as the doctors gave their decision. It was Mark's cancer. The information seemed unreal to Kelly. The thought that the guy she loved and had spent her adult life with was now fighting for his life seemed unfathomable. The word cancer is extremely heavy. Watching it impact a loved one makes it more than just a medical evaluation, as many viewers have seen firsthand. Everything in your existence is shook to its foundations by this explosion. After the fact, Kelly recalled that she had trouble breathing at that same moment. She saw more than just her spouse when she looked at Mark. She saw her soulmate, the father of their children, and the companion she was unwilling to give up. "We will overcome this together," Mark whispered to her, despite her skepticism. Kelly Ripa's job is making millions of people happy every morning. But even after receiving her diagnosis, she couldn't hold it together when she appeared on her show. Her sobs became audible as her voice quivered. For the first time ever, the normally composed host faltered in front of the cameras. In front of the crowd, she revealed that her family was going through a tough time. Her unfiltered feelings conveyed a great deal, even though she suppressed certain information. More than just a TV star was seen by Americans. They witnessed a frightened woman who was concerned she might lose her husband. Quite a few saw themselves reflected in her tears as sadness. The connections of love and fear are universal. The odyssey of restless nights and many questions began with Kelly's public exhibition of vulnerability. Michael, Lola, and Waken were their children, and they were devastated to hear the news. The news that one's father, the one who shouted at games, shared joy, and gave advice, is battling cancer is difficult to process. Kelly and Mark reached an agreement around complete candor. They rounded up the children and told them the truth. They swore to face the task as one family despite the pain, no matter what. Regardless, Kelly became the rock for the family in the background. She hid her tears from her children so they wouldn't see how terrified she was. As a mother watching, you know how hard it is to keep your strength for your children when your own heart is breaking. Kelly lived her life in that way, an almost unbearable weight. Their entire existence came crashing down one fateful night. An urgent transfer to the intensive care unit was necessary after Mark's health worsened. In retrospect, Kelly recalled the image as a cacophony of dazzling lights, the sound of racing feet, and the hurried activity of healthcare workers. She felt a crushing wave of sadness as she sat in the hospital bed. Everything she had feared was coming true. With dogged persistence, the clinical team fought for what seemed like an eternity. Kelly prayed with a level of passion she had never experienced before during those excruciating hours. He was too much for her to bear to let go of. They began their ordeal in the intensive care unit, where terror reigned. A glimmer of hope, though, emerged as the sun rose. The team broke the news cautiously but encouragingly after hours of suspense. Mark remained steady. The battle was still lost, but he had made it through the night. Kelly went back to his side, silently promising as she held his hand. She whispered, "I will not let you go," bringing up their past together, their children, and the fact that their love was stronger than any illness ever could have been. Despite the lack of a miraculous cure, it provided them with a lifeline during their most difficult time. They relied on that flicker of light as their guide. It wasn't a victory parade, but rather a succession of careful, painstaking steps to leave the intensive care unit. Going back to my own place felt good. However, it brought about more difficulties. Their once comfortable home life was now overlaid with the clinical realism of rehabilitation. Treatment appointments and Mark's erratic energy levels now determined the pace of their days, rather than production schedules and parties. Medications and various containers cluttered the kitchen island. The conflict had formally begun. The once horrifying concept of chemotherapy became an everyday reality for them as they faced it week after week. Kelly watched helplessly as the procedure weakened the man who had always been a rock of physical strength. Mark had lost his usual vivacious energy and was now crippled by a deep physical exhaustion. But even though he was exhausted every day, his spirit would not die. An unwavering resolve to stroll in the yard and fleeting glimpses of his old brilliance occurred at times. Kelly was reminded by a light squeeze of her hand that the man she loved was still there, battling with all his might. Kelly realized she was leading two lives at once. Leaving Mark with a nurse or the kids in the peaceful house, she would sneak out to the studio in the early morning hours. Kelly Ripa, America's morning sunshine, would reincarnate under the glittering lights of that arena. She interviewed guests while cracking jokes and chatting with them. Along with her unwavering professionalism, her co-hosts and devoted viewers noticed a new dimension in her eyes, a silent power that had been shaped by personal tragedy. She let her audience in just enough by making nebulous references to family struggles and expressing gratitude for assistance. Her image remained untarnished despite her fragility. Because of it, she became more likable than before. She was a symbol of strength and determination for millions of people going through tough times. Her joy would fade as she hurried home, her heart still linked to the man who had become her world. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, even the kids felt the effects. Once upon a time, Michael, Lola, and Wachin were merely children whose renowned parents looked out for them. They stood like rock-solid supports. The eldest son, Michael, showed maturity by taking charge of the household and doing errands and scheduling. Lola became her father's confidant because of her innate empathy. She was more therapeutic than medicine because she could sit and talk about anything for hours. The youngest, Wachin, shone brightest. The infectious optimism of his youth and his desire to bring joy to his father's life were powerful remedies for the depressing reality of his illness. While sitting in the living room with Mark and the other three of them one evening, Kelly glanced around. A mellow movie was playing in the background. Wrapped under a blanket, Mark dozed off in his armchair. The quiet presence of her children sat close by, creating a protective circle. There was no fame, no prognosis, and no terror at that very time. Nothing but love existed. Their unity and the fact that they were stronger as a whole were concepts that they grasped at a fundamental level. They had an unwritten agreement. They refused to let this disease control them or drive a wedge between them. The living room bubble was no match for the harsh realities that awaited them as the weeks and months passed. The initial shock of the diagnosis had worn off, and the relentless grind of survival had taken its place. Mark used a harsh treatment regimen. Despite a cautiously positive prognosis, the physicians were not taking any chances. The road to remission was long and winding. The people found it most difficult to disregard the bodily change. The paparazzi were so determined to get Mark, even though he tried to avoid the limelight, that they finally succeeded in capturing a few blurry images of him exiting a Manhattan clinic. The toned body that had been featured in glossy magazines was no more. Rather than that, it was a shadowy figure, concealed even on rather warm days by thick scarves and coats. There was a flurry of speculation in the tabloids, with headlines asking questions that Kelly was clearly not prepared to address. Will Mark Consuelos eventually disappear? Read the cover. A harsh contrast to the lively man who, every morning at breakfast, was still fighting with all he had, within the premises of the Consuelos Rancho home. But we stuck laser-like focus. The skill of compartmentalization was something Kelly mastered. She was the bubbly host on TV, making viewers giggle with her clever commentary and internet videos. But her cheerful demeanor would vanish as soon as the cameras rolled to a commercial, and she would anxiously check her phone for any updates from the nurse back home. On bad days, she felt that the contradiction was shattering her fragile mind. Kelly was left staring at the studio audience, unable to hear the producer's cue. One Tuesday night after Mark had been violently ill from a new prescription, it had been a particularly terrible night. A co-host had to gently prod her to return to the present. Kelly was aware that she was navigating a narrow path through a canyon of sorrow, while the audience giggled, assuming it was just a bit. In the middle of winter, their personal conflict reached a tipping point. Fevers are typical in chemotherapy patients with weakened immune systems, and Mark's had become a potentially fatal one. On this occasion, there was a distinct urgency to get the hospital. A terrifyingly quiet automobile slid down the icy streets of New York City. There were no sirens. Mark had almost no consciousness. A searing sensation between their hands. He vacillated between madness and consciousness for 3 days. While resting in an uncomfortable medical chair and subsisting on coffee from the vending machine, Kelly adamantly refused to leave the room. The real strength of her spouse became apparent to her during these scary, silent hours. Even when dreaming of his fever, he remained vigilant. Whispers about getting witching from wrestling practice or seeing if Lola had nabbed her would escape his lips.